Welcome to the 2025 Candidate Forum for the District 64A State Representative position, organized by the League of Women Voters St. Paul. My name is Max Sanders, and I'm a member of the League. If you're interested in learning more about or joining the League of Women Voters, please stop by our table after the forum. We are pleased again to use this space and expertise of the St. Paul Neighborhood Network for filming this forum and live streaming it to YouTube tonight. A quick orientation to this building for those of you here in person. Restrooms and water fountains are out the back door. I'll start closing remarks at 8:15 in order to end the forum promptly at 8:30, but you're welcome to mingle with the candidates after the forum. The League of Women Voters St. Paul conducts candidate forums to provide the public with an opportunity to hear candidates discuss the issues that are important to our community. The League is a nonpartisan organization. We do not support or oppose any political party or candidate. The views expressed in each forum are those of the candidates, not those of the League. Local leagues and the League of Minnesota post complete, unedited recordings of forums. Editing is authorized only for official media reporting. Excerpts or edited clips of candidate forums may not be used for partisan or political purposes, and we ask that those in the audience refrain from taking photos or videos tonight. All 6 candidates were given rules of the forum, including no campaign, issue, or promotional materials, signs, or political clothing in the studio. We intend for the space to be neutral for the audience as well as the candidates. Each candidate agreed to the following format. Candidates will have 2 minutes each for opening and closing statements and 1 minute to respond to each question. A candidate may ask for a 30-second rebuttal only if directly quoted by a previous candidate. When the candidates are making opening and closing statements, timers will lift their signs to notify the speaker when they have 30 and 15 seconds remaining and when they must stop talking. When candidates are answering questions, the timer will lift their signs to signify that 15 seconds are left and when they must stop talking. We've collected online questions for the candidates, and as I mentioned, if you're in studio tonight, you can write questions on the piece of paper provided on your seats or just raise your hand. Hold up your completed card and a volunteer will retrieve it. Those will be sorted by our question facilitators to ensure similar questions are grouped together. Remember, your questions should be directed to all the candidates. It cannot be of a personal nature, and it should be relevant to the position of state representative. Since this is a state election, ranked choice does not apply to the December 16th primary or the January 27th election. You'll be marking 1 vote for only 1 candidate. I'd urge the live audience to be as quiet as possible so we all can hear, and hold your applause until the end to allow as much time as possible for your candidates to speak. That completes the instructions. Now it's time to make sure your phones are off so we can start. I am pleased to introduce our candidates for District 64A State Representative. First in order, closest to me, Beth Frazier, Matt Hill, Meg Luger-Nicolai, Dan McGrath, Lois Quam, and John Zwier. Welcome to you all. We can clap at this part. I'll allow it. We're now going to begin with 2-minute opening statements, starting with the person closest to me. So, Beth, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. My name is Beth Fraser, and I'm running because we need a leader who understands the high stakes that we're facing and will be ready on day 1 to address the affordability crisis, defend our democracy, and protect our neighbors and the Constitution. When I was just 14, I was handed a note that said, "We all know you're gay, and we all hate you." Signed dearly, not queerly, probably everyone. I was devastated. I learned on a visceral level what it means to be hated for who I was. But it propelled me to spend the last 30 years of my life fighting for justice. I've done so for 8 years as the Deputy Secretary of State, for 8 years as the Legislative Director for the Progressive Coalition that preceded Take Action Minnesota, and now as I run the Senate Elections Committee. I've succeeded at winning passage of groundbreaking legislation on issue after issue, even when the GOP controlled the House, the Senate, or the governor's office. And I spend my free time organizing small business owners to fight authoritarianism and for policies that will help us all to thrive. As your state rep, I will push and expand the boundaries of what is possible. Universal health care, universal child care, protect and expand the freedom to vote, get corporations out of our politics. I will protect the Constitution and stand with and stand up for our neighbors who are being attacked by the Trump administration. I'm Beth Fraser. I am ready to be a tireless, fearless, progressive champion on day one, and I hope to earn your support.
Thank you, Beth. Matt?
Yeah, thank you, Max, and good evening. I'm Matt Hill, candidate for 64A State Representative. My story is the St. Paul story, and when this opportunity opened up all of 3 weeks ago, my phone rang and business owners I know and community leaders reached out and said, Matt, you know what? You got some ideas, you got some energy, why don't you see about this? And so I said, hey, it's a 1-month sprint to hear directly from the voters what their issues are and what they care about. And so 3 weeks into this, I want to speak directly to the voters in 64A. What we're hearing about is different than what you're going to hear up on the stage tonight. What I'm hearing out on the streets is that everyone wants to live in a safe community. There's no greater social justice issue than allowing all people in our communities to live their lives safely. Second off, the issue of fraud and corruption in our state government at this moment in time requires bold and proactive stances to get our house in order. And as a Democrat up here, I am the only one willing to step forward and talk about this openly, not just out of my own background, but because this is a real reality to our Big Tent coalition. And lastly, as a lifelong St. Pauler, I want to bring some energy and vitality. Our capital city needs it. I'm excited to do it because without St. Paul thriving, our state does not thrive, and we must all work together. I'm Matt Hill, asking for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Meg?
Hi, my name is Meg Luger-Nicolai. I am the DFL and labor-endorsed candidate for House District 64A, and I'm grateful to be here with you and grateful for those who dodged the snow and came here tonight as well. I am your neighbor, I am a parent, and I am someone who works in St. Paul as well. And so I know that it is often hard to navigate in the winter, and that we are working really hard at all times to make sure that we've got the infrastructure that we need to make this a livable city. Important to me are two things at the very top. First is that those of us who value our education system, which I think many of us do, that we have an equitably funded education system, that St. Paul Public Schools get what it needs, but also that they don't have to go to local taxpayers for levies as often as they do. And so one of the things that I would like to work on as a legislator would be ensuring that we have an equitable aid formula that recognizes the fact that St. Paul is home to so many valuable institutions, churches, government buildings, schools that don't pay taxes, but property tax owners do. Secondly, it's important to me that workers have a voice in the legislature. My day job is as a labor lawyer for the State Teachers Union, but my entire career has been working for working people. And it's important that we have someone in the legislature who's thinking about how you can be safe and treated fairly at work every day, and that has always been what I've done. Finally, I think it's important for all of us to be in recognition of the fact that healthcare costs are spiraling and we need to find a new path forward. And what is happening now is not working. There are many, many important issues, and in talking to so many voters throughout this extremely abbreviated but enriching process, I know that my neighbors are deeply committed to issues relating to sustainability, to transit, to housing, and I hope that we talk about all of those things tonight because those are all going to be important to me if I'm elected.
Thank you, Meg. Dan?
Thank you. My name's Dan McGrath, and I'm a candidate for state representative for 64A. I hustled here from my son's concert over at Capitol Hill, where I have he and his little brother in school, and their older sister walks to Central High School from our house in the Lexington-Hamlin neighborhood. These are tough times. Donald Trump's campaign of dehumanization is here in St. Paul. And it is difficult not to lose hope when we see so much of what's coming at us. I maintain a sense of hope. I hang on to it, and I think you do too, or you wouldn't be here tonight and watching this at home. What I think is most important in our politics right now is someone who can build coalitions to get big things done at the Capitol. For 25 years, that's what I've been doing as a community organizer. I'm the founding executive director of Take Action Minnesota. And in that role, I remember when the Republican legislature put on the photo ID amendment on the ballot several years back. It faced long odds. 80% of people in the state supported it. And I faced a choice. How do we start to push back? And I started by building the strongest and the broadest and the most diverse coalition I could. And together, people from all across the state rallied together and overcame incredibly long odds. We found each other when the odds were the longest. And we pushed back on an attack on our democracy, and we can do that again. As a state legislator, there are a few things I want to focus on. And the first is healthcare. I believe in single-payer healthcare, and I believe we need to kick the HMOs out of Minnesota Care to save the state $1 billion and to make our care more accessible and more affordable. Investing in strong public schools is critical. So is investing in local government aid so the city of St. Paul can provide essential services and so that all of the services don't fall back on property taxes. Lastly, I'm very proud to have the endorsement of the Land Stewardship Action, which is a farm and rural organization, and their commitment to climate and sustainability is mine. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Lois?
Thank you. As a citizen, each of us have a responsibility to build a more perfect democracy. And at this moment, we face the gravest challenge we have in our lifetime to do that. And so each of us must step forward. And that's why I decided to run for this seat. I want to use my lifetime of experiences on behalf of my neighbors, Minnesota, and our democracy. I grew up in Marshall, Minnesota as a Lutheran pastor's daughter. I worked on my first DFL campaign in 5th grade, and I can still remember stuffing envelopes with a little carton of milk next to me. And I learned in my dad's congregation that the cost of an illness could be as hard on a family as the illness itself. So by the time I graduated from high school, I knew I wanted to work on improving healthcare affordability. And I have done that throughout my life, in the halls of the state capitol, in the halls of the U.S. State Department, in corporate boardrooms, and in nonprofit meeting rooms, here and around the country and around the world. I am most proud in that work of leading the commission that resulted in Minnesota Care. Minnesota Care has endured, and in the legislature, I will co-author legislation to extend and expand Minnesota Care. It is core to our ability to address the healthcare affordability crisis today. I came to St. Paul to go to McAllister, and I raised my 3 sons here. They're Central High School graduates, and 2 of them still live in the area and have 5 children, the oldest of whom is 4. So I am deeply committed to the future of St. Paul. I will work at the Capitol to ensure that we have the support we need from the state for the funding for our schools and our services. I'm honored to have the endorsement of City Councilors Molly Coleman and Sarah Yost, who will know that I will work closely with them. And I'm honored to have the endorsement of Attorney General Keith Ellison, who knows I will deliver for the state on affordable health care. Thank you.
Thank you, Lois. John?
Thank you. JFK used to call himself an idealist without illusions, and that's what I'm trying to live up to these days. How do we respond to a federal government that is bent on cutting us off? How do we respond to a federal government that's invading and terrorizing our communities? How do we respond to individuals who are taking firearms and shooting up our schools and our churches and politically assassinating people? The way we respond is by coming together as community. We come together as community, we stand up for community, we invest in our neighborhood's future. We are rightly proud of our neighborhoods here in 64A. I have seen it since I was first welcomed to this community as a renter in Summit Hill, and then as a homeowner in Mac Groveland. I worked on the Summit Hill Association District Council and on the Mac Groveland District Council as well. We have worked together as neighbors and friends to foster a healthy community. I'm running to bring our neighborhood's priorities to the state legislature, to reinvest in St. Paul and support our community work. Let's come together as Miriam Park and Union Park, as Mac Grove, as Summit Hill, as Lexham, as Rondo, and as Summit University. Let's be 64A together. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We're now going to move to the question portion. I should have mentioned this earlier. So I have a grid, so we're going to be bouncing around, but the whole point of the grid is so everybody gets the same chance to answer in the same order. So we're going to bounce around, but John, we are going to stick with you first. The question is, what role do you see federal and state budget cuts as playing in leading to rising property taxes in St. Paul? And what will you do if elected to try to curb that increase?
Thank you for that question. I mean, as I mentioned already, yeah, the federal government is bent on cutting off our resources. And so Minnesota and our neighborhoods, we are more on our own than we have been in a long time. And so we have to get creative. You know, the community members who I've spoken to keep saying, you know, we've been willing over and over again to kind of reach into our pockets and support increasing taxes, increasing school levies, because we believe that these services are super important, but more and more it's unsustainable. And so we have to look at the properties that we have here in St. Paul, and we have to figure out new solutions. One of the things that I've learned over the course of this time is that we have a lot of public land that doesn't contribute to the property base. And we need to help those properties, when appropriate, transition to be private properties that can be on the rolls.
Thank you. Dan, we're going to go to you next. Same question.
20 years ago, Republican Governor Tim Pawlenty decided to drastically cut local government aid. And those cuts affected St. Paul and Minneapolis disproportionate to other cities in the state. 20 years later, we are living with the consequences of those cuts. And as a result, in trying to scrimp and scrape by, the city has had to shift more and more of essential services, the cost of essential services, to property taxpayers. That's not a sensible way to pay for local government and the services that we need. So one thing that I feel very strongly about is working at the state level to increase local government aid to cities like St. Paul. I also want to say that that's not the only way what we need to revitalize our economy. We also need investments like state bonding that we can put into downtown St. Paul to redevelop vacant properties and create affordable home units or housing units, be they apartments or homes. That's a critical piece of what we need to actually have our whole city be robust and thriving.
Thank you. Lois?
The federal budget cuts are going to hit us in a significant way. If you just think about the cut to Medicaid that's coming, it will mean tens of thousands of Minnesotans will lose their insurance coverage. And if you look across the city, Twin Cities, every emergency room is full because that is a place of last resort. So it's a serious set of things that we're going to have to look at. And the first is we have to look at reforming healthcare to make it more affordable and accessible so we address this challenge as a state effectively together. The second is we need to look at taxes other than property taxes. Property taxes are regressive. Income taxes on higher earners and corporate taxes are better taxes. And I want to spend a minute around corporate taxes because our corporations are successful in this state in a big way because we have such a fine education system and we need to fund that. And lastly, I think we really need to make the unique argument for St. Paul. We have the Capitol, we have these great colleges, we have these great churches. We need to make the case at the Capitol of how special St. Paul is, and we need local government aid. Thank you.
Thank you. Beth?
So it's hard to go after so many folks that also have great ideas, and we share a lot of the same ideas. So I would say that we need to, I certainly agree that we need to be looking at fighting for additional local government aid and payments in lieu of property taxes. The state really should be paying the city of St. Paul payments for the state buildings We have so many, in addition to the Capitol, all of the agencies that are located here, they should be paying the city payments in lieu of property taxes so that St. Paul's budget is more solid. We also need to empower local governments to use things other than property taxes. We need to repeal laws that prohibit local governments from considering an income tax or a land use tax or other taxes that would instead be based upon an ability to pay.
Thank you. Meg?
I am deeply troubled by the prospect of federal cuts in various areas, and I'm also troubled by our short-term, medium-term budget picture at the state level. I don't think that it is sustainable for us to continue to hope that we'll have a budget surplus at the state level, and that has come true often, but it is not always the case. So there is no question that now we need to look at a fifth-tier income tax to raise taxes on some of our wealthiest earners that are at a relatively modest income rate at this time. Additionally, we do have to look at closing corporate tax loopholes, and we need to look at identifying corporate taxation that is sufficient to help us raise revenue. It isn't going to be possible for us to fill the holes that the federal government creates, but we can do things to help local governments, including the one here in St. Paul, from having to continually raise taxes.
Matt?
Voters of 64A, let me tell you, as a small business owner in this city, the property tax statements that we've just received are 30%, and the insurance and cost of living that are added onto it are becoming unaffordable for the working class, period. And as a Democrat running in this, I think what we've just all heard is no solutions. And that is the willingness I will bring as your representative to the Capitol, an ability to prioritize our needs. And as I talk to voters and they come up to me and say, man, we cannot afford this. This is real and this is a crisis. And I will help us move this forward to bring the taxes down for all of us.
Matt, we're going to stick with you for this next question. In light of what's happening at the federal level, what are next steps that Minnesota needs to take to make the MNsure market accessible and affordable?
Yes, the insurance debacle that has been unfolding, I believe, can be spoken to very well by other candidates and its failure to get us where we're at today. The state needs to also be realistic of we need to partner with our federal government to figure this out. This is beyond just a state issue. This is a national country issue, and I am all for single-payer health care. I see that in the care my friend needs as I serve him as his personal care attendant. This is a real issue of real needs, and the unwillingness to move forward on a solution is what you hear from the other candidates.
Beth?
So let's start with the fact that healthcare is a basic human right, and everyone deserves access to the care that they need. And we should not have for-profit insurance companies or for-profit health providers. Everyone providing health care or insurance should be nonprofit unless we're going to single payer. But folks should not be making a profit off of this. And given the cuts that we are facing, we do have a rainy day fund in Minnesota, and we may need to tap into that given the cliff that we're about to fall off of when it comes to health care. And longer term, once we win a DFL trifecta again, we need to look at increasing the highest income taxes, create a fifth-tier income tax, and increase large corporate taxes to help ensure that we can all thrive.
Thank you, Beth. John?
Thank you. So it feels almost intractable addressing the healthcare system. One of the things that we need to do is work with the other side, with the Republicans in the State House, to figure out what we can find common ground on. One of the areas that is, in particular, in talking to voters, that has been a concern is that the way that we value healthcare right now, primary care physicians are completely undervalued in our system, and we need to figure out ways to adjust. They call them RSUs, what the reimbursement from Medicare and Medicaid for health insurance or for care, especially primary care, is undervalued, and we need to increase that.
Thank you. Meg?
There are thousands of Minnesotans who are about to lose ACA subsidies that is going to make it either impossible for them to afford health care or only possible if they forego other basic life necessities. So we do need to find a way in the short run to shore up access to MNsure for the individuals already using it. And then I strongly support finding ways to support access to MNsure. I have worked with many individuals whose health insurance depended on them having a job, and those individuals were about to not have a job, and their family was about to not have health insurance. And we need to make it much easier for individuals to move to the exchange when they can and have appropriate subsidies in the event that their, unfortunately, employment-tethered health care no longer becomes available to them. That is a solution that we have in the short run. It is going to require resources. Obviously, the long-term goal, though, is having a universal single-payer system so that we can move health insurance away from the employment situation and move individuals away from having to worry about whether or not they have a subsidy from a feckless federal government.
Thank you. Dan?
So it's important to remember that MNsure is a critical lifeline for people who need to afford insurance and can't otherwise get it somewhere else. So one thing that the state of Minnesota can do is renegotiate the terms of the subsidies that health insurers receive from the state to be on that exchange. So one thing that we can do is actually hold a stronger line with the insurers that we're counting on for care. The state of Minnesota can do that, and we should. Yes, I'm glad that folks have gotten on the single-payer train, and I'm certainly for it. And I think the thing I want to say is saying it out loud is not the same thing as moving in that direction. So one thing we can do is we can work to kick off HMOs, private insurers from Minnesota Care, and in doing so, we can save $1 billion for our state and build a public infrastructure, a public architecture for our healthcare, which in the long run actually makes our healthcare system more accountable and creates the opportunity to even grow it as a public infrastructure in the future. That's a step towards single payer.
Lois?
There are going to be tens of thousands of our neighbors who are going to lose their coverage because they can't afford MSure. And that is going to hit about the time the legislature goes back into session. And the legislature is going to need to do something to be able to cover that gap. And then on the heels of that will come the increasing number of uninsured around Medicaid. And I would do three things. I would look at the opportunities. I think Dan's made some very good points about the opportunities for the state to do more around how MNsure works. I would extend Minnesota Care as another option for people to have. And then we're going to have to do something bolder. If you look at the paper today, UCare, one of the big state insurers for the vulnerable, went out of business, has gone into the state. We're going to see more of that. And it will give us the opportunity to do something bolder for people in providing health insurance coverage.
Thank you, Lois. We're going to stick
Does
with...
that include handing it over as other opportunities to United Healthcare as an example?
We gotta only hold rebuttals if your name is mentioned, Matt.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to stick with Lois for this next question. What is your position, Lois, on the proposed bike path going down Summit Avenue?
I understand it's more of a city council issue than a legislative issue, but I support environmental initiatives and improved transportation, including expanding bike paths around the metro area and around the state.
Thank you. Meg?
I support continuing the project as planned. I think it's necessary for us to have multimodal transit, and I think there are individuals who use different forms of transit for whom they take bikes to reach that form of transit. So it doesn't reduce the amount of traffic load that Summit will currently be able to bear.
John?
So I support the bike paths, absolutely. I do think that it can be done in a way that can also respect the homeowners who live along that path, and in a way that is environmentally responsible and environmentally friendly.
Beth?
The Summit Bike Trail, I support the current plan, and as I understand, it was approved unanimously by the city council, and rebuilding Summit Avenue is needed to deal with the 100-year-old infrastructure underneath it. And having the bike trail not only provides another option for transportation, but also allowed us to access federal funds, which helps defray the costs so that they're not on property taxpayers. And so this was a win-win in that it helped keep our taxes lower than they would be if we just waited until the pipe burst, and allowed us to modernize this street and provide for the bike trail.
Matt?
St. Paul boondoggle. And this comes directly from the residents themselves. Over these 3 weeks, they've approached me, Ramsey Hill, Summit Hill. This is where the residents hear the issues on the ground and really tell you what's happening. As someone who's worked and lived in those communities, I know what they're talking about. I am all in favor of an all-abilities transportation network, but we need some realism here. This is a diversion of resources that our city cannot afford, and this is a misguided amount of energy that could be focused on building our capital city in ways that doesn't divide us.
Dan?
I have a fantastically curious and very independent 10-year-old. And he loves to bike from our house in Lexham to the hardware store past McAllister, which means he bikes down Summit and crosses Snelling Avenue, and never am I more terrified than when he crosses Snelling Avenue on his own. It is vitally important that we have safe ways to get around this city for people of all ages and all means. I absolutely support multimodal transportation in all its ways. I'm proud that Senator Scott Dibble, who's been the chair of the Transportation Committee, endorsed me in this race, in part because we see eye to eye on things like transit. The role of the state is to invest in mass transit and in ways to help people get around. And as a state legislator, that is what I am excited to do and what I think is vitally important for helping to reinvigorate our entire city. So it's important that we have ways for people to bike, including my kid, including me, but also that we have ways for people to catch a bus, catch a train, and do so safely and efficiently.
Dan, we're going to stick with you for this next question. What would you do to make renting more affordable for people?
So we are living in an affordability crisis. It's what compels me to get into this race and to run for the legislature. It's important to say that the affordability crisis hits all of us, but it definitely hits people who are looking for a home, buying a home for the first time, or also are in their home right now. When it comes to renting, one of the things the state of Minnesota can do is play a role in building more housing units. We made big strides in this in 2023, and we need to continue to make big strides. Remember, we're living with the consequences of the housing bubble of 2008, and we simply do not have enough places for people to live that are affordable. What we can do as a state, and what is a good start, is to use bonding dollars to convert vacant buildings downtown into housing units. And in doing so, maintain, and as a state legislator, maintain a standard of affordability for those units. That's a big step towards helping renters have more places and more options to go. And in the end, that helps to put a cap on rising rents.
Thank you. Lois?
This is an area I think we can build a statewide coalition at the legislature because there are affordability issues around housing in all parts of our state, in rural areas, in the suburbs, and in the Twin Cities. And I am looking for, as we go into the legislature, the opportunity for all of us to be able to find those moments where we can make the connection across the state. When you look at healthcare, it's a similar way because we know that people have access to healthcare issues around the state. And our hospitals, we have the most critical access hospitals in the rural parts of the state. And as we saw yesterday in the Star Tribune, Faribault has closed maternity coverage, and that's happening in other places. So on affordability of housing and affordability of healthcare in other areas, I think we need to look for the ways that we can build consensus going forward, and that's what I'll do in the legislature.
Matt?
64A, I think, is plus or minus about 50% renters, so I want to give a shout out to them. I was one myself for a number of years, and I know how that feels. St. Paul's in an interesting spot. I mean, rent controls failed. The affordability crisis rolls on. I think what the state needs to do, or the legislature, obviously, is build more homes, but we need to be realistic. The state can't even build 50 mental health beds without it costing $250 million. As your fighter for you from this district, my commitment is to help us bring the resources that this district needs and invest here in our own neighborhoods, our own communities.
Thank you. Beth?
So in Minnesota, we are 100,000 units short, housing units of all kinds. And so we certainly need to be incentivizing building all kinds of housing across the state. Because right now, people can't move out of their starter homes, and they can't downsize, and they can't move from rental units to homes because there isn't any movement. There aren't enough homes to go around. So we certainly need to be building more units, because that will, supply and demand, bring costs down. But that's going to take some time. And so we also need to be investing more, providing more resources for folks to have home buyer assistance, down payment assistance. We also need to provide additional funds to help renters who are behind on their rent so that they don't become homeless. Because it's much harder for people to get themselves back on their feet if they don't have a place to sleep or a place to keep their things.
John?
So, I mean, the other candidates have spoken beautifully on this issue. I think an additional idea to work on would be to try and get some of the public land, some of the land that's right now owned by churches and that are being underutilized, and making it easier for those communities to envision a future. Many of them have missions to get more affordable care, more affordable housing. And if we can help them to transition from a religious purpose to a purpose of affordable housing for our communities, I think that is one additional way that hasn't been said yet that I would look into helping facilitate.
Meg?
I think that it is going to be necessary for the state to help subsidize the building of just more units overall. And I think that that is something that can be done relatively in the short run. But I also think that we need to be scrupulous about making sure that, for example, if they are rental units, that they are, mixed income, and that they are appropriately identified as actually mixed income. So low income isn't well above the poverty level, well above somebody's ability to actually afford the rent. Those controls need to be in place. And then I think John references something that would be very useful, and there's legislation that has been under consideration, passed in certain forms over the years at the legislature to enable faith communities to, for example, build tiny homes on their property. And that is not a total solution to the problem, but every little bit helps. And for individuals who may need transitional services, that can be an ideal situation in which they can be in a supportive community and also relatively low rent.
Meg, we're going to stick with you for this next question. What is your position on data centers in 64A or elsewhere? How do you balance the environmental impacts with business opportunity?
It's a really important issue to a number of different communities. Obviously, there are labor coalitions that are in support of this. The construction of them may create jobs, and this is also a growing area of our economy. However, there is pretty recent reporting indicating that data centers really use resources at a rate that ultimately ends up driving up energy prices for in individuals in the nearby area. And so I think, and obviously there's concerns about water usage in a number of different parts of the United States. So I think that the data center is not necessarily a hard stop or a no-go for me, but I think that what we need to do is look at ways in which those can be built and can be either self-sustaining in terms of the data use, or are subject to the same type of metering or the same type of usage limits that any other utility or corporate entity would be in the area, so that you don't have this drinking of the milkshake. If folks remember the movie There Will Be Blood.
John?
So I am not familiar with this issue. I'm not deeply read into this issue. I would be very interested in learning a lot more about it, about what the balance is between the environmental impacts, the energy impacts, and things of that nature. But I do not have a position on data centers at this time.
Dan?
Data centers have an immense impact on natural resources where they are built. And I think the challenge with data centers is that we have behemoth companies negotiating and trying to leverage local municipalities into building where they are. So part of what the state of Minnesota can do and should do is be a first stop for anyone that wants to come into Minnesota and ask a set of questions about what is it you're trying to build, and what is the permitting process we are going to require you to go through. Right now, it's a little bit like the Wild West. And any time that you have a $1 trillion company trying to negotiate with a local municipality, that local municipality will not win. So it's critical that we as a state are on our front foot, and we look very seriously at the impacts of these centers as they're built.
Lois?
I'm really worried about data centers. I think they have a very negative effect on the environment. I've played leadership roles in 2 environmental organizations, the Nature Conservancy and the National Wildlife Federation, and I have an endorsement from Friends of the Boundary Waters, and I'm really worried about the impact of data centers on our environment. Secondly, I agree completely with Dan. Why would we give subsidies to Meta, Amazon, Google, these companies? It is way out of bounds. And thirdly, I agree with Dan that, when new industries occur, we have to take a look at how we permit, how we do it. We need new solutions to new problems, and new industries present a new set of problems, and we need to make sure as a state we're tuned up to deal with this. Thank you.
Matt?
Pretty sure everyone has a cell phone in their pocket here tonight. And AI's here, whether we want to pretend like we don't know it or not. And the technology and the 21st century energy realities that come with it require actual real thinking. And I think what we've heard here is just a willingness to turn our back and run away from how big businesses are working, how the 21st century technology is being deployed, and how our state's economy can find ways to harness this opportunity in our technological era to our advantage as the great state that we are.
Beth?
Well, I agree that AI is here and that there will be data centers, but there should not be a data center in 64A or in the city of St. Paul. We need to be looking out for the planet and our people. And so we definitely need to be sure that there are that these extractive industries are well regulated. We need to be sure that they're using closed loop water systems so that they are not draining our aquifers. They are not expelling hot water into lakes and streams that would kill fish and otherwise pollute. We need to be sure that they're using renewable energy. We need to be sure that they are sited away from neighborhoods because they're very noisy. And we need to get rid of the tax breaks that were just extended for data centers. We should not be giving tax breaks to billionaires.
Beth, we're going to stick with you for the next question. How do you plan to work across the aisle, and what does that mean in practice?
So I have spent the last 30 years working on and winning legislation almost every year in that time. And so I have learned how to work with Republicans and find areas of common ground, and without ever compromising my values. And so part of it is trying to understand what each side is trying to accomplish, and then you can find areas of agreement. And so I've been able to do that when I got the nation's strongest corporate accountability subsidy law passed, and when I got the strongest safe at home law for survivors of domestic violence passed, and when we got the law passed for online voter registration. I've done it again and again. And so I've sat across the table, we found areas of agreement and ways that we could work together.
Matt?
Fellow Democrats, voters of 64A, think you're going to hear some of the same tired rhetoric that caused 2024, and we're going to seed it right over here in 2026. Can't have it both ways, people. What would you really do? I have answers. So I just throw it out to the moderator for Beth, Meg, Dan, Lois, John, so they're in the mix. You know, what would you really do with the other side to actually get something done?
Meg?
Okay, so I live here now. I've lived here for a long time. I grew up in what I will call the exurbs, but was really the hinterlands, and that is Wyoming, Minnesota. And I also work in an organization with 85,000 members and probably 84,999 opinions. And what I know is that when there are some issues where we may never reach agreement or even rapprochement, there are issues on which we have absolutely aligned values. Safety for children is one of them. I think safety for people, that is why Beth was able to do the work that she was able to do on the Safe at Home project. I think that there are areas in which we can find aligned values, and we need to do that. But what I can't do, and what I wouldn't commit to doing, is compromising my own values. And so where there is discord and it involves someone's right to be, someone's right to live and exist in our community, that's a place where we're going to have to build a majority so that we don't have to do as much reaching across the aisle.
Dan?
Several years ago, I organized with a group of people, all of whom had criminal records and were struggling to gain access to the job market. And the project that we undertook was to try to pass a state law to ban the criminal history box in the private sector. The problem was the legislature at that time was controlled by Republicans. So we undertook a process of engaging Target Corporation, first with emails and phone calls. Eventually there was even protest. But at a certain point, we found the right person in Target and started a months-long negotiation to figure out if Target was willing to step forward as a corporate citizen. During the course of that campaign, the legislature flipped, and that bill was still stuck in Democratic hands. And the conversation we had with Target went something like this: well, Target, if you think you're going to ban the criminal history box, would you support a state law to even that playing field? And they said yes, and they called the State Chamber of Commerce, and the Chamber of Commerce dropped their opposition to that bill, and then it passed in that Democratic chamber. For me, that is an example of working across the aisle and with people of different interests and getting something very big done.
Lois?
Working across the aisle to get legislation passed is the job of any legislator. Because legislating is not just about slogans or ideas, it is about getting concrete changes in place that can change the course of people's lives for the better and make our society fair. And my life has been about that at every moment. If you're a Lutheran pastor's daughter in a small town, you quickly learn how to get along with everybody. And when I passed legislation like Minnesota Care or worked in my other fields, I've always been working with people who have different views, come from different walks of life. And the key to find is the one thing you hold together. If it's about reforming healthcare, it's about a shared experience where you had trouble with health insurance or had a significant illness. If it's about supporting our schools, it's about a shared experience of how public schools have made a difference in students' lives. And that's what I'd look forward to doing.
John?
Thank you. So I think we all know that we're facing an even House. The House of Representatives will be even between DFL and the Republicans. And so it is absolutely essential that we reach across the aisle. I think that one of the advantages that I have going into this is that I have been a liberal and been working on Democratic campaigns for a long time, but I'm not an insider. And so being an outsider and not being beholden to the current political situation that is really polarized, and instead coming in fresh and being able to have those conversations with the Republicans and with the Democrats to figure out a power sharing agreement in which we can take hard votes so that each side is taking hard votes in the next regular session is going to be absolutely essential. So being able to have those conversations is key. I grew up in a faith community, and that faith community, and I've run out of time, so excuse me. Thank you.
We are going to stick with you, John, for the next question.
Right.
What is your stance on ICE operations in Minnesota?
My stance on ICE operations is that the federal government is terrorizing our communities and is abusing the system to try and come in and make a political point on the backs of people that they are demonizing. I think that is one of the essential things that 64A can do, is stand in solidarity with our immigrant brothers and sisters and stand up against that. I think that a state legislator needs to come alongside of those brave individuals who are doing civil disobedience. And I also think that the state legislature, when we see things like the St. Paul Public Police, St. Paul Police Department acting and saying that they're doing crowd control but really attacking our citizens, I think that what we need to do is hold them accountable for those activities. And so that's my position on ICE coming into our communities.
Lois?
It's horrible what's happening. When I read about the student who was really kidnapped at gunpoint at Augsburg College yesterday, it's terrifying. And we in 64A are going to need to stand with our colleges, McAllister, St. Thomas, and others, as they face these kind of threats. And the threats to our neighbors and friends in the Somali Minnesota community and the Latino community is immense. And at the legislature, I want to work to build a statewide coalition around this, because the community I grew up in, Marshall, Wilmer, many other parts of the state, rely on the well-being of the Somali community and the Latino community. I think this is an example of where we can come together as a state against this threat from the federal government.
Dan?
Was the individual at Augsburg, though, a convicted sex offender?
Matt, we're not doing a debate, we're doing a forum, which means you can't talk until it's your turn or somebody mentions you. So we're going to go to Dan next.
So my core value is that all people have inherent worth and dignity. There's no exceptions to that. And we should all feel, I think we all do feel, a sense of moral outrage about what is happening. It is unconscionable. And I think it's important to say that this is one of the moments in history where we all face choices. So one choice is, do we stand on the side of those who are being oppressed at this very moment? I do. And I always have, and I always will. I think what that in practice means is, first of all, as a state legislator, it is knowing exactly who to call at the Department of Public Safety and in the governor's office to make sure that the state administration is responding and aware of exactly what needs to happen. We should never allow any public servant to conceal their identity with a mask. We don't allow it for teachers. We don't allow it for caregivers. We should not allow it for anyone in the field of public safety. And then third, we should not allow Minnesota to be a home to any detention center in any regard.
Meg?
I am deeply disgusted by ICE activity in our neighborhood. It is not directed toward keeping anyone safe. It is directed toward state-sponsored terrorism, which is what it is. And it needs to stop. And I think the federal government is going to act, and there are limits to what a state government can do to resist it. But this is a dry run for disrupting our elections in the next cycle as well. And so I do think prohibiting mask wearing is necessary. I do think keeping a tighter rein on our county and local law enforcement and their participation in those actions, and in fact, saying you will not receive state funding if you continue to participate or assist in these functions, is a direction that we need to go. I think that I also, in my work with the teachers, have tried to prepare educators to resist within the limits of the law, ICE enforcement in schools and other sensitive places, and I think that work needs to be continued.
Matt?
I think you're hearing a lot of talk without actual solutions. And as someone who is a public servant, uniquely working in a role with Ramsey County and our sheriff's office, I speak from experience when I know that public safety means something to everyone very differently. Without a doubt, what is coming at us from the federal government is causing trauma and chaos and is intentional. And it is something we have to navigate through clearly and coherently. We cannot think of public safety just with the events of today, but also need to remember Annunciation, this summer's political assassinations, and not more than 5 years ago, our district, 64A, was begging for the National Guard to be deployed along Grand Avenue for public safety. I bring a comprehensive solution and attitude called the St. Paul Trust Act that I would be proposing and would offer as not just a voice, but a vote for a safety package this session.
Beth?
Well, I am running in large part because of the political moment that we're in and feel compelled to stand with and stand up for our neighbors who are being terrorized by the federal government. We need to we need to not only stand with folks, but also change state laws to provide greater protections. So we should certainly make sure that we not only have separation ordinances in Minneapolis and St. Paul, but that we have them for all peace officers across the state. We should prohibit counties from renting out their jails as ICE detention facilities. We should ensure that the private prison in Appleton is not used as an ICE detention facility. We should prohibit law enforcement officers from using chemical weapons like tear gas for crowd control. There are many things we can and should do to keep our people safe.
Thank you. We're going to go to Dan to start us off with this next question. Dan, considering the state budget forecast, if elected, how would you work with your colleagues to improve that forecast?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that the question I always start with is, what are the levers that the state of Minnesota can pull, right? As a legislator, what's the lever you can pull? And for us, in this session that's upcoming, it's a bonding year, right? The opportunity for the state to make significant investments in capital projects at the local or at the state level. So I think one of the pieces that we need to do is look at how we are using bonding, and I want to use the city of St. Paul as an example. How do we use bonding to help our local economy thrive? I think one of the ways to do that is by looking at investments in vacant buildings downtown to convert. We have a housing crisis, and if we can use our bonding to address the housing crisis, then what we will also have is more people living downtown, which is a step towards a more thriving economy locally here in St. Paul. And as we know, St. Paul's economy is a big part of the state's economy. I think that's one concrete thing that we can do.
Thank you. Meg?
I think that among the things that we can start to work on, in addition to, I don't disagree with Dan that bonding is something that we can absolutely work on or must work on in the next session. I think we need to still look at raising revenue. And there's, I think that we can do as much as we can to improve tax collection, and that is actually usually pretty successful in Minnesota, so the margins aren't necessarily there. So we need to look at other ways to expand that. Now, we are in a divided legislature. Is that going to happen? Unlikely, unless we can actually peel off a member of the other party. So these things may be something that we have to build toward in future sessions. But I do, the outlook for the next session is actually relatively acceptable. It's the out years that we are concerned about, and those are the years that I think we can plan and build for.
Lois?
We face in this next budget, we're in good shape, but as Meg just said, in the out years, things change. And in the organizations I've led, when I've been in this kind of situation, you look at the near term. Are there investments that you can make in the near term that will reap benefits over a longer period of time and lower cost and better outcomes? And I think that is the case. And I'm going to go back to healthcare for a minute, because we know that we have significant problems, particularly for our young people in mental health, needs of mental health services. And those cause enormous costs. As you may have seen in the Star Trib this week, there are young people living in our emergencies rooms because they don't have any place to go. That's extremely costly. It is one example of the kind of upfront investment we can make for a better return over time, and I would seek to maximize those circumstances.
Beth?
Well, as my colleagues have said, the current budget outlook is okay for this coming legislative session, and we will face issues in the following sessions. So I agree that we should be looking at ways to invest this year that will help our economy. And so one of the areas where we should be investing is early childhood and childcare. The more money that we put into childcare, the more that parents can work, which will generate more income tax, more sales taxes, they are spending more. And so that is one of the areas that we should be looking at. We should also be looking, as I mentioned before, at housing supports to ensure that people don't lose their rental housing, don't become homeless, because again, the more that people are in crisis, the more services they need, the more it costs in the long run. And we need to be investing more in healthcare as people are facing this cliff.
John?
Yeah, so echoing what Dan and Meg and Lois have already been talking about, and Beth as well, those are fantastic ideas. I think we also need to build on the tradition of Kali-Her in really creating wonderful relationships and investing in private, public, and labor, I would add, labor relationships that invest in some of these areas that we really want to see in our neighborhood be invested in going into the future.
Matt?
St. Paul voters, as my campaign has come together quickly, I've really appreciated the messages I've got both directly and at the door about a willingness to talk about the fraud taking place in our state and the experiences of our constituents who are saying, hey, I got to balance my budget. Like, what is going on? Where is the $18 billion surplus? How are we already in the red? As a small business owner, I can absolutely relate to that. And this is a real predicament. I think what we just heard was no answers. Here's what you're going to get from me as your next representative. Straightforward, common sense, honesty, and accountability.
John, we're going to go to you first for this next question. What role could the Minnesota legislature play in regulating social media, especially in regard to its effects on young people?
Yeah. Well, I'll say first, I made my announcement on Facebook. I made an announcement about the campaign and emphasized the fact that firearm legislation is something that I'm really interested in. And the amount of hate that was spewed on that website, I was a political candidate, so it's open for comments, is pretty eye-opening. I think that we can do more. I also shadowed a teacher a couple weeks ago, and teenagers are very tempted to use their iPads and use their social media in class. And I think that we need to ban social media from the classroom. There are, of course, some benefits to social media that we need to look at, but certainly under the age of 13, kids, I think, need to be protected from social media. And I have more ideas on that as well, but that'll suffice for now. Thank you.
Dan?
One of the things that I see that's really working is at Central High School, they have a simple rule: off, off, and away. Your phone cannot be on your person. Your phone has to be off when it's on school grounds, and it has to be away from you at all times. That's a very common sense thing, and it works wonders for my kid and the other kids that are there. I think that limiting access to social media, at least during the school day, is a very sensible standard that we should aspire to, because it is something that does help people who are trying to teach our kids in the classrooms as well. I hear that from teachers. I think the other thing that we can do and really encourage is more public education for parents about the harms of social media. So this question is about regulation, and I gotta be honest, I don't know what the state can do about regulating social media. I don't know what the federal government is doing about that. But what we can do is more education for parents to help equip them to make better decisions for their kids. And that's a piece we can do as a community.
Lois?
I think about this in two ways, John. I understand what you're saying, the kind of threats that people put out and hateful speech that people put out on social media with no accountability is dangerous to our society. I also have followed very carefully the research about the impact of social media on adolescents, and it's really profound. So maybe we could be the state that would really understand that research on adolescents and what social media does, and work to build a consensus within the public schools and parents and the community more broadly about how we would want it to be, and maybe that could lead to regulation. Australia today bans social media for all children or young people under the age of 16. I think that'd be hard as a regulation, but why don't we become the expert at the research and the impact and then find a way to craft a really unique piece of legislation that could help?
Beth?
I think the issue of social media is really a public health issue, and we need to take that approach to it. That social media really is causing issues for our teens, for our younger children. And we do need to continue to have schools have policies so that students do not have their phones with them and that they are not using social media during the day. But we also need to be investing in education for communities, for parents, so that they understand the dangers and understand the bullying, the type of abuse that can come from this technology.
Meg?
Our ability to regulate this as a state body is somewhat limited by federal law, Section 230, and also really the First Amendment, because social media is speech, and it gets a broad set of protections based on our federal Constitution. However, the First Amendment comes with what are called time, place, and manner restrictions, and those can be applied. And I think one thing that our state legislature can do is partner with our federal legislators, our congressional delegation, and Representative Craig was working on legislation that would have essentially created boundaries around schools and other zones where there's a high amount of students. And so we can build coalitions around supporting Representative Craig if she's working on it, or other legislators. And then also that would have to involve state partners in implementing it, because the districts are regulated by our state government. So ultimately, we're going to have to deal with the existing state regulatory or federal regulatory scheme. But I think limiting access is something that we can do, particularly during the school day.
Matt?
Yeah, I appreciate the First Amendment coming up, because I think up until then, all you had heard was willingness constituents to have more censorship and regulation over your lives. And that's a scary thought. But on the role of technology and children and youth, as a parent of 2 St. Paul public school kids myself, there's a very active initiative there, and that's where it locally starts. At the homes, with the parents and the families who know best, and bringing it up through the grassroots, at the schools, to the school board, and as your legislator. I'm not going to overreach or overpresume. I'm going to listen to parents, I'm going to listen to community, and I'm going to fight for what this district brings forward to me as thoughtful, intentional legislation to improve the future of our children.
We have time for 2 more questions. Matt, we're going to stick with you for the next one. How will you work to decrease gun violence and make our state safer for Minnesota children?
Yes, timely topic, and gun violence is unacceptable, period. As I said previously, as someone who works in and around this space, this is a top priority for me and so many constituents I've heard at the doors. As someone who's been around and seen gun violence, this is a real issue in our own district, but I'm not going to hide behind what needs to get done. And so, maybe the speaker and the governor and the Senate majority are listening, because here's my pitch. This session, I'm willing to be not just a leading voice, but the vote to help ensure that our district moves forward a comprehensive public safety and gun control package signed and delivered. It's time we actually take steps and stop just talking in circles, and that's what you're going to hear in these responses.
Beth?
Well, Minnesotans and everyone has a right not to get shot and not to have to worry about getting shot. So we certainly need to be looking at bans on the deadliest weapons, weapons of war, high-capacity magazines. We need to look at banning binary triggers and ghost guns. We also need to be looking at allowing local governments to set their own policies, because just because something isn't great for Faribault doesn't mean it's not right for Ramsey County and St. Paul. We should be able to prohibit guns in City Hall, in public parks, and we should be able to ban guns at the state capitol.
John?
Yeah, this issue was the motivating factor of why I joined this campaign. I believe we can do more than just have a debate, and I don't really understand why it's a debate between the DFL and the Republicans between assault weapons bans and more mental health resources. I think we can come together on getting more mental health resources and on banning assault weapons. But I also think that there's more that we can do to change the culture around gun violence and around firearm ownership and firearm. And I think that that starts with trigger locks. I think that anybody who is carrying a firearm, and I think that we should empower the public to be able to regulate this, should have to have a trigger lock that's big and bulky and orange and easy to identify, so that if it's not there, we can assume that that is somebody who is, and they are in a place where guns are not supposed to be, that we can respond quickly as a community to that violation of our culture. So that would be a distinct way that I would address it. I also think we need higher taxes. All right.
Sorry. Meg?
I think one of the most important things that we can do is expand and really, with fidelity, implement red flag laws so that individuals who have committed crimes or are experiencing mental health crises do not have access to weapons, and so that they cannot cause a permanent harm that can't be fixed because of a temporary situation. I also certainly support having bans on assault rifles and extended magazines. That's, to me, that is a very common sense solution that I certainly support. And then I am also interested in looking at our tort laws to determine the extent to which we can try to move around the federal limitation on holding manufacturers responsible for what happens to the weapons that they sell, and really have only one purpose, which is to harm.
Dan?
I've lost 2 friends in my lifetime to gun-related deaths. I feel very strongly that we should do what we can to ban high-capacity magazines and any gun that is described as a weapon of war. I really agree with your point as well, that I think the utilization of red flag laws is critically important. And I appreciate what John is saying, which is like, and this is also fundamentally an issue of culture. And so while changing laws is important, and when given the opportunity, I would certainly vote for them, I think it is also important to recognize that the project of culture change is one that is a project of listening. So the project of actually talking to people who own guns and trying to understand better of why and how and what might be the sensible ways that we can start to move the needle. I don't propose that as a short-term solution, because it's not. But also, this is an intractable problem, and we have to be able to engage much more effectively on this issue. And I think until we do, we're going to be stuck in the same situation.
Lois?
What kind of society do we want to be? How many children do we want to lose? How many of our political leaders do we want to have assassinated? That's what this is about. And when I do this work, at the heart, I'm a mom, and moms demand action. And it is time that we get beyond where we have been on this challenge. It's about gun safety and gun control and mental health support. It's not about hunting. Hunting is great. And we have to now build the coalition, or we are going to lose too many of the people that are most important in our lives. And we have to reckon with that and not tinker around the edges, but be bold here.
Lois, we're going to stick with you. This is going to be our final question before we go to closing statements. How will you advocate for the needs and interests of St. Paulites at the state legislature, and how will you weigh those interests with the best interests of Minnesota?
I will work for the needs of St. Paul relentlessly and steadfastly. I love this city since I came here as a young student to go to McAllister. It is a special place. I have 5 grandchildren here under the age of 4 who will be citizens, and I'm going to work for them and for every other young child like them. It requires a legislature to work for St. Paul. I think there are few moments where the needs of St. Paul are going to differ from the needs of Minnesota, because we're in it together on these things. And to get the needs of St. Paul met means building coalitions with legislators from other parts of the state. It means being really diligent at creating a strategy for what St. Paul needs and then following up to build the coalition in the legislature so that other legislators can support it. And I'll work with the city councilors who've endorsed me, Molly Coleman, Sarah Yost, and everybody else to get that done.
Meg?
Well, I love St. Paul, and in my day job, I am obligated to be a zealous advocate, and I would happily be a zealous advocate on behalf of the city. I am endorsed by our mayor-elect because she knows that I will bring the interests of St. Paulites to the forefront in the decision-making that I have. I agree with Lois that I think for the most part, our interests are typically not in conflict, and that is because we do have enough resources to typically meet everybody's need as long as we are willing to tap into those resources. One of the things that's most important to me, and one of the things that I have appreciated throughout this very abbreviated campaign, is having the opportunity to talk to you, to talk to my neighbors, and find out about the issues that are critically important to them. And my commitment to you would be that I would continue that work throughout my candidacy and certainly throughout my time as a representative, so that the issues that are important to you are the issues that are being put on the table and ensure that we are taking care of them.
John?
64A is the heart of Minnesota. It's located between our two great cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis, and it serves as a vital link. And it's also an important incubator of Minnesota's future, with all of our educational institutions, our religious institutions, our small businesses. And I love the neighborhood. I love St. Paul. I love 64A, and I am absolutely committed to seeing more resources come back to the neighborhood, especially as the federal government cuts us off. And I look forward to making that happen if I'm in the state legislature. Thank you.
Beth?
I have really appreciated the opportunity during this campaign to have so many conversations with you and hear your stories, and commit to continuing to do that. I'm also a leader in Isaiah, which is a very broad-based statewide coalition of folks who are people of faith from churches and mosques and Buddhist temples, but also folks, 600 child care center owners, and folks who live in manufactured home parks, and folks from all over the state. And what we have found as we've built this very broad-based coalition is that people everywhere are struggling and need the same things to survive. We need better health care. We need better child care. We need clean water. We need better roads. And so I will be fighting for both what 64A needs, but I've learned that it's the same as what everyone else needs.
Matt?
Well, I appreciate Meg bringing up the endorsements, and I think it's important to add context. In a hastily convened convention, it was passed along with 60 people out of a voting block of 25,000 in our district. So when our party wants to talk about democracy, we really need to look at that question. That aside, I do appreciate there is a lot of love for St. Paul, I think, genuinely up here, which is good. But nothing tangible was promised here. And this is my promise to the constituents, 64A, to be nothing but a fighter for you, to go to bat at the state capitol on your behalf every day, to bring home what is coming up from our community here in our neighborhoods, to deliver the resources, the policy change, the leadership that our capital city deserves.
Dan?
I love campaigning. I love talking to people. I love knocking on doors. I love being in your living rooms and talking to you. It is what feeds me as an individual, and it is the guide stone of 25 years of community organizing and coalition building. That doesn't go away as a legislator. It is the reason why I want to be a legislator. I think that is the basis for being a good advocate for St. Paul. Who are you talking to? Who are you finding in the community that might not be seeking you out, but that you need to seek out? The second thing I want to say is the politics of our state, a lot of times there's discussion of an urban-rural divide. A lot of times that is a political fiction. It's a story we're told to try to divide us from each other. I have a practice of working with people in the greater part of the state, with farmers, listening to their experience. And what I have found is the healthcare stories of small farmers are very, very similar to those of us in St. Paul. The words may be different, the values are the same, and the struggles appear to be exactly the same. That's how you become a good advocate for St. Paul, not just cheerleading, but building coalitions with people that have different interests, but the same end goal.
All right, so we've used our time for questions, and now the candidates, as a reminder, will each have 2 minutes for closing statements. The timers will notify you when you have 30 seconds left, then 15, and then finally when you must stop talking. For closing statements, we're going to go in the opposite order of opening statements, which means, John, you are up.
So, talking to neighbors, talking to parents, talking to the kiddos in our community, what I find over and over again is that the community wants health resources for all of us. They want safe places to live and to work and to play. They want support for our active neighborhoods that enrich community with arts and education, libraries and community centers. And they want public, private, and labor partnerships that support those things. And so the reason why I'm running, the reason why I want to be the state legislator for 64A is to bring those priorities to the state legislature and to get some things done by, yes, as Dan is saying, by reaching across the aisle, by sharing stories. Beth talked about Isaiah, and we've talked as a group about people-centered democracy and bringing that people-centered democracy to the state legislature and encouraging the state legislature to get off of its polarization and into solution-making that Kali Hur had a tradition of doing, and that's what I would bring to the position. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, John. Lois?
Friends and neighbors and St. Paulites, there's so much at stake right now. For the first time, we have a federal government that's targeting our state and willing to harm our neighbors and loved ones. Look at what they were willing to do to cause hunger from cutting off SNAP to our state during this last shutdown, targeting Minnesota. We face crises of affordability. Healthcare, housing, so many vital services are compromised for many of our residents. And the legislature, as it convenes this winter, is going to be confronted by this pressure from the outside and these challenges from the inside. And what's going to require for our state to be successful in the midst of that is the ability to come together. And in all the work I've done, whether it be in the halls of the state government, the halls of the State Department, corporate boardrooms, nonprofit meeting rooms, and school lunchrooms, it has been to bring people together from other walks of life to create a solution that can go forward. I will do that especially on healthcare, because healthcare is life or death. And we need to put the kind of reforms in place, first by covering the gaps that are coming from the federal government, second by extending Minnesota Care, and thirdly, then building a consensus within the state amongst patients and healthcare providers and others about the kind of system that we want to have and put that in place. And that will require diligence and care and compassion, because these are real people's lives. I want to close by saying that we're going to face especial threats to women. This federal government has threatened our health care, has threatened our dignity, and threatened women's ability to make the central choices in our life. And I will work to fight for women's rights in every way at the Capitol. Thank you.
Thank you, Lois. Dan?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and I really have enjoyed the opportunity to be running for this office. By and large, up here, there's a lot of similarity in terms of policy and in terms of issues. Not the same. There are notable differences, but there are like a lot of similarities. The difference is in approach. And for me, it's not a hypothetical to build coalitions to get something done. It's what I have done for 25 years. And whether that's been on expanding Minnesota Care and protecting it, whether that's been working alongside our allies in labor to raise the minimum wage, or banning the criminal history box from a job application in the private sector. The work of building coalitions isn't just an intellectual exercise where you look at a map and you try to figure out who you need to talk to. It's a value set. It's an orientation. Do I want to go find people who think differently than me and find a place where we find common ground? Do I believe my fate is tied to theirs, and that's going to compel me to try to reach and engage with them in a different way? So when I think about the role of a state legislator, and I have to say I appreciate in talking to the voters of this district, expectations are sky high. Right? Voters are very thoughtful, and I appreciate that. And I want you to have sky-high expectations, because this seat cannot only be a reliable vote for the DFL caucus. It must be a leader who can build coalitions, the coalitions we do not have now and that we desperately need in our politics, that our state needs. That is why I decided to step forward and do this. In a moment where so much is so difficult, where it's so hard to be hopeful, I carry that sense of hope, and I carry it because of the people that I'm in relationship with and the people that I'm eager to meet. That's what I think we need from a legislator in this special district at this special time. I am excited to be that person, and I ask for your vote.
Thank you, Dan. Meg?
One of the most important things, or one of the things that I'm most proud of working on in the last 3 years, was House File 2. Doesn't really get more concrete than a bill number, and that is the paid family medical leave program. And that was adopted in coalition. That wasn't something I did myself, but worked as a partner in labor, a partner working with faith organizations, working with what is called the Main Street Coalition, which is a number of small businesses who saw the paid family medical leave program as a lifeline for them to provide a benefit that they wouldn't necessarily be able to afford to provide themselves, and other individuals who saw it as a lifeline for people who might need to care for parents, might need to care for children, might need to care for chosen family. And that is a bill that we worked very hard to get passed. And that is the work that I've done day in, day out for the last 15 years in supporting the legislative work of my colleagues and in bringing bills forward that make life better for all Minnesotans and, of course, from my perch, working Minnesotans. That is what I commit to doing as a legislator every day for the people of 64A, because I know that it will help you and it will also help everybody in the state of Minnesota. Those opportunities have come in part during years in which we have had a DFL majority. I'm a DFLer. I'm here today because I'm in a primary that's a party primary. And for me, it's also important to grow that majority. And so I will also commit to you that I will work to do that. And that is something that I have done also day in, day out over the last 15 years, is work to talk to voters, not just in St. Paul, although it's super important to talk to voters in St. Paul, but also in every part of the metro area, and in St. Cloud, and in Duluth, and in Moorhead, and every part of the state, to say, this is the agenda that we want to bring forward that we believe will benefit you. As a mother, as a neighbor, as a resident, as a coworker, these things are things that I can bring to the table for you, and we'll do that.
Thank you, Meg. Matt?
Yes, thank you to the League for hosting. Appreciate it. And thank you to those who encouraged me to run. And I've been absolutely touched. My heart actually grows heavy, heart grows full with the response from constituents who are excited to hear somebody talk the honest truth as a Democrat in St. Paul. And as a constituent asking for your vote on the 16th, what you're going to get out of me is what I'm hearing at the doors. Everyone wants to live in a safe community. There's no greater equitable project than allowing our children to go to school safe, to our workplaces, etc. Also, nothing you heard up here answers the immediate threat to what fraud is doing to our state. And as a Democrat, I am going to take an honest, open approach to what needs to get done in our State House on behalf of our capital city. I'm Matt Hill. I'm running in the 64A race as a St. Paul dad, as a public servant, a small business owner in my free time. So I encourage you to vote and vote Matt Hill on the 16th. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Beth?
Well, thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. I have spent the last 30 years, fighting for justice and getting groundbreaking bills passed again and again. And I am ready to do this. I'm the only candidate who not only has worked on legislation, but has worked for the legislature and has worked for the executive branch and has implemented bills that have been passed. I am also endorsed by labor. I'm endorsed by 5 senators. I'm endorsed by Anika Bui and Hwajong Kim, city council members. I'm endorsed by Friends of the Boundary Waters. I'm endorsed by Outfront Minnesota Action. They know that I am ready to do this and that I will be a fearless advocate for what we really need, for policies that are the real answers: single-payer health care, universal child care, strengthening protections for our neighbors as they are being attacked, standing up for our Constitution. But I've been doing this long enough to know we don't just get to say it. I've been doing this long enough to know that there will be compromise, and it's going to be hard, and that we are going to have to talk to Republicans and build coalition. And I've done that hard work. And I'm ready to do it again for you. So I am Beth Fraser. I am ready to be a fearless, progressive advocate on day one, and I would appreciate your vote.
Thank you all for participating in the forum this evening. We believe the success of our city and democracy partly depends on the values, knowledge, and commitment of our elected officials. Candidate forums are a great way for the public to hear directly from the people asking for our vote. Running for office is really hard, so let's give the candidates a round of applause for their efforts. The primary for the 64A position is on December 16th, and Election Day is Tuesday, January 27th. Check out the League's Vote 411 or the Secretary of State's website to see what the ballot will look like. Please vote, and please urge your friends who couldn't attend tonight to watch the recording of this event on YouTube and learn about these candidates. Many thanks to our friends at SPNN for their filming skills and their audio and their studio. We appreciate our volunteers, these candidates, and all of you in the online and SPNN audience. Remember to stop by the registration table to learn more about the League of Women Voters and use vote411.org for help with this and future elections. Good night.
Good to see you, Matt. Thank you.